Bogna. I hope everybody's doing well. Thank you for adjusting the time. I know the time change is a bit, I don't know why every year they change in a different week in Europe and in North America. And hello,
Hello, everybody.
everybody. And so here in Europe, it will change March 31st.
Well, we are already in spring.
I know, yeah, but it's the Sunday, Easter Sunday, they change the time over here. They like saving time. Anyway, welcome everybody. I'm Mario Bernardi. Nice seeing everybody back. And I will be starting today. We start this new journey about Gian Lorenzo Bernini, the complete works by Gian Lorenzo Bernini. And I will be following like loosely chronological order, especially for the first 20 years of Bernini's life. A little less for so this episode will be more chronological, a little less in the next ones, because I would like to, explain in a bit more complete way the different aspects of Gian Lorenzo Bernini talents, because Bernini was really one of the last complete artists versed in almost every field of art, which included also literature, because he was also an author of comedies, which only one has survived. And also he was, of course, a sculptor, an architect, and a painter who is believed to have painted some 200 paintings or so, although only maybe 20 or 30 of them are preserved and are confirmed to be Bernini's hands. And he would have had also work as a scenographer, a designer of stage, and also an engineer for machines used during shows. One of the most famous was once he flooded the entire stage, actually with water tanks and water running on the stage, something that nobody else had done for the next 200 years. It was only Richard Wagner at the end of the 19th century with the Götterdämmerung. So, and I like to start this adventure exploring Bernini's life and Bernini's complete work, which is quite huge. He had made a lot of artworks in his life, by starting with Gabriele D'Annunzio. I'll read the translation from a novel called Il Piacere, The Pleasure, in which this is the life of a young man in Rome, it's a very kind of, his senses get blended with the sensuality of the city, the art, the richness, the display of wealth, which also you could see in this beautiful women is attracted to. It's very decadent. Gabriele D'Annunzio was a poet and a writer, was born around 1860s in a small town in Abruzzi, in Pescara. And then in his 20s, he arrived in Rome, and he was really kind of excited about being in the city at the beginning of the 20th century. There was a lot of going on in Rome, and he died just before World War II. Rome was his great love. He's talking about Andrea Sperelli, which is the main character of this novel. Not the Rome of the Caesars, but the Rome of the popes. Not the Rome of the arches, the baths, the forums, but the Rome of the villas, the fountains, the churches. He would have given all of the Colosseum for the Villa Medici, the Campo Vaccino, which is the Roman Forum, for the Piazza di Spagna, the Arch of Titus for the Fontanella delle Tartarughe, the princely magnificence of Colonna, of the Doria, the Barberini attracted him much more than the ruined grandeur of the empire. In the house of the Marchesa da Teleta, his cousin, of an album of worldly confessions, next to the question, what would you wish to be? He had written Roman prince. So this is really more to explain how in the early 20th century, Bernini basically was revived, because Baroque art, starting from the 18th century, half of the 18th century, kind of started to be regarded as over ornated, empty, frivolous, without serious meaning or depth, which is quite the contrary, actually. And so for most of the 19th century, it was disregarded as something which reflected the corruption of the noble families, the corruption of the church, everything wrong that prevented Italy for becoming a nation and becoming one of the dominant nations of the 18th and 19th century, as other nations did, like France, Spain, and England, among others. And in the early 20th century, Rome was created as the for the third time became the capital of Italy, the Terza Roma. And so basically, not for the third time, but it became like there was a revival of the city of Rome. And then the model, of course, was not the Rome of the popes, the second Rome, but the first Rome, the Rome of the emperors. And so I find it quite interesting that D'Annunzio was actually attracted by the decadent Rome, the Rome of the popes, the Rome of the nobles, the Rome of Gian Lorenzo Bernini, and we'll discover why this has much deeper implications. This is a 15th century painting of Naples. It's an arrival of a large military armada in the Bay of Naples at the time when Naples was under the Spanish rule. And at the top, you could see the Castle Sant'Elmo and the Certosa di San Martino. And that the reason why we have in Naples is because December the 7th, 1598, Giovanni Lorenzo Bernini, that was his complete name, was born from a Napolitan mother and a Florentine father. Now, at that time, because Italy was divided into many independent kingdoms, Florence with the Grand Duchy of the Medici, Naples and southern Italy was basically the Kingdom of Naples and the King of Sicily, which were basically a colony of the Kingdom of Spain, with the Spanish vice king, viceroy, and then of course Venice and other parts of Italy were separated. Most people will refer to their nationality based on not on when they were born or where they lived, but when their family was from, where their father basic was from or grandfather was from. And Gian Lorenzo Bernini all his life signed as Gian Lorenzo or G. Lawrence. He used the name Lawrence more than Gian Lorenzo. Florentino, from Florence. So, and that was because Florence still in the 17th century was the crib of the Renaissance, the city where the greatest artists came from, Leonardo, Michelangelo. And so, of course, there was this idea that the Florentine blood made him a great artist. And Pietro Bernini, or Pietro Bernino, so there's up until the 19th century, names, surnames, they kind of fluctuate. They change their morphology kind of changes. Many of them are patronymic, or many of them are the name of towns, which are turned into surnames. Bernino was a popular surname in Florence and derived from Barnaba, which was one of the saints that was considered one of the protectors of Florence. So San Barnaba, and Bernino, that's where the surname derived. And Pietro Bernini was a sculptor of the school of Giambologna. And basically, he was a follower of the last great Renaissance sculpture. He was smart enough, clever enough to have understood pretty early that the great moment of Florentine art was long gone. Michelangelo, when Pietro Bernini was born, I think he was born in the early 60s, Michelangelo was still alive, old but alive. Michelangelo himself had left Florence 30 years earlier. So basically, Pietro Bernini understood that if he wanted to find a space for art and try to do something new and more innovative and different, he had to leave Florence, which was, yes, still great and had all these great masterpieces of art from early Renaissance, Donatello, and then the Michelangelos, and so much more. But it was all looking backwards, contemplating this great past. And this great past prevented them to basically develop a new style or to basically move forward. There wasn't really space. It could just work like remaking things that were already been made before. While Naples, and here I just offer a overview of Naples today, a very busy and crowded city, which was busy and crowded in the 16th century. Naples was one of the largest cities in Europe, together with Paris, in the 16th and 17th century. So Pietro Bernini understood that there was a chance in Naples to do better things, to work for a wider audience. As a large port, there were a lot of nobles, a lot of people in transit. There was this connection with the King of Spain. Of course, the rulers of Naples were nobles, high nobles of Spain, which are appointed by the King of Spain. So, of course, there was a chance also to, probably get in touch with one of the royals. And so he moved to Naples at the end of the 1500, 1592, I think, or 94, married a Napolitan woman, and they started to have children. He had, I think, a couple of girls, 2 or 3 girls, and then he had 2 boys, and then more girls and more boys. Bernini had about 10 siblings or so. With one of them, it was very close, and he became his assistant. Consider that the last sibling that Bernini's mom gave birth to was nearly 20 years after Gian Lorenzo. So she gave probably child. When they got married, I think that Pietro was in his late 20s, mid 20s. She was 12, 13, 14. Today it's horrendous, a child bride, but it was common up until the 19th century. It was very common that you choose a child bride so you can, shape her up as you want to be a fantastic wife and a mother of a dozen children or more. So, and that was the norm. It was something that, although for us it's today horrifying, but it's something that it was considered the norm and the good thing to do. Here we're overviewing Naples. This is the royal palace, which was as today is bigger than it was back then, but it was already built in the end of the 16th century. What does Pietro Bernini does in Naples? There are several artworks by Pietro Bernini. So this artworks I show you now, they are in the Certosa di San Martino, which is right at top of the Vomero Hill. So Napoli is basically, it's like a kind of a basin and surrounded by, so this is the Bay of Naples. It's kind of surrounded by, Naples is right here. And you could see how it became a very successful port because it's naturally protected. It's a little bay in the larger Bay of Naples, and it's surrounded by mountains, basically, or hills. And at the top of one of these, right here, there is the San Martino is up here. It's this part here, the Certosa di San Martino, the charter house. And then on top of that, there's Castel Sant'Elmo, one of the castles that back then and later was heavily armed with cannons, which were not so much to protect the city from enemies, but was to protect the rulers of the city from their own people, as it often happened in the Renaissance and Baroque and 19th century, not just Italy, but in Europe, especially in Italy, though. And the chapter house is beautiful, and several gifted artists worked here. There's a beautiful church, largely made at the end of the 16th century and during the 16th, 17th century. And today is a museum. And here there are some of the works made by Bernini at the time where Gian Lorenzo was made. So Pietro Bernini worked in the style which is very similar to several other artists which work in Florence at the time, and brought this to Naples. This is Saint Martin sharing his mantle, giving the mantle to the beggar, and then this is the Certosa and the castle. And in the Certosa, there's also this beautiful Madonna, which has a very elaborated mantle, and all wrapped up in this mantle. There's the baby, the child there, and there's a little Saint John. Now, this statue has element of the late Mannerism, and element of the late Michelangelo-esque style, but you see all that kind of draping. But we can also compare it with a painting, which is basically of the again of the early 17th century. We are more or less in the same years. With this, you see inclination of the head of the Virgin Mary. There are some elements similar to Caravaggio's paintings also in this statue by Pietro Bernini. Now, Bernini also worked in construction of large fountains, and it's very interesting the fact that then Gian Lorenzo, the first fountain he made was with the father, and then he made several other fountains later on in his career. And Rome still has these wonderful fountains. Except one, the other ones are all in the same place where they were originally meant to. Not these ones which were moved several times. This is the one of the Neptune, which was made together with another sculptor called Michelangelo Naccherino, a Florentine as well, which went to Naples to look for a job. And the other one was the Fountain of a Giant. Now, this is the square in front of the royal palace of Naples. This square was called Largo di Palazzo up until 1815, 1820, when the church was built, San Francesco di Paola, and then it was named Piazza del Plebiscito afterwards, after the unification of Italy. This is the royal palace at the end of the beginning of the 17th century. And on the corner towards the sea, here on the right, there was this fountain, the Fountain of a Giant, which is this one as well. It was the work of a team, but also Pietro Bernini made some of the sculptures here. So, and the fountain was moved several times in Naples. This every 20, 30 years they moved, starting from the late 19th century. Anyway, now it's on the Via Partenope on the Lungomare, right on the waterfront, and it's really a gorgeous fountain. It's like a window on open sea with the blue black sky. It's very beautiful. But as you could see, this is still Renaissance art. It's symmetrical, and there's nothing crazy, or there are no surprises, there are no jumps or flying figures. It's quite static. It's nice, especially because it's a very nice environment, but it's kind of boring as well. There's nothing like interesting about it, I would say. That. And the let me just see. Pietro Bernini in 1606 decided to go to Rome. So he left Naples. Maybe he didn't receive the attention he expected, and he wanted to. Bernini was smart enough to understand that he wanted, working as a sculptor and as an architect was good, but it was like it wasn't life-changing for his family and for his here. If he wanted to really make his career into something that changed a life for him and for his children, he needed to get the attention of the Pope, or attention of a ruler, of a royal. He needed to get that kind of clients which could make you noble, which can give you titles and benefits and profits, and not simply keep working to produce object, which is what he was doing back then. So what he did, he moved to Rome. He was hoping to get close to the papal family. At the time, the Pope was Pope V Borghese, and and Pope Paul was um, having the chapel of Santa Maria Maggiore. Santa Maria Maggiore has two chapels. The Basilica of Santa Maria Maggiore in Rome has two chapels. One is called Cappella Sistina, the Sistine Chapel, not the one of the Vatican, but was made by Sixtus V. And the other one was the Cappella Paolina, which in these years was was been made by a number of artists, including Cigoli, who was a friend of Pietro Bernini, was another Florentine artist, emigrated as well, who was working as a painter and an architect in Rome. Cigoli was also friend of a very famous scientist, Galileo Galilei. And when Cigoli wanted to paint the dome of the chapel with the Immaculate Conception standing on the moon, he wanted Galileo to make an image for him of the moon with the moon spots, with the moon states, with the moon marks, we call macchie lunari. And now Galilei was the one who basically invented the astronomical observation made with instruments by inventing the telescope. Now, the lens and the using of lens in at sea was something already the Arabs did probably around the 10th, 11th century. And so Galilei took an instrument that was already in use and made it in a way that he could look at planets and stars and the moon, and especially he discovered the satellites of Jupiter, which are named after the Medici, and the moon. Of course, this and other things he did got him in a lot of trouble. He had to stand 2 trials and died and excommunicated. But at the beginning, he was quite cautious, although it's very famous that when he made the telescope, he wanted to prove that it was working. The professors of the in Padua, the University of Padua in Rome, they refused to look into it. They thought it was some sort of witchcraft, so they didn't believe it. Anyway, Galilei, that he could see in his famous portrait by Sudermans, provided drawings, accurate drawings of the moon and its rough surface for the fresco made by Cigoli. And of course, we're talking of a community of artists and painters and a community of intellectuals. And of course, these people were all in touch with each other and also befriended each other. And there was a point where all these artists were having reviving very old challenges and questions, which was the question of the superiority of the arts. Which art stands above the others? Now, in the history of philosophy and the history of art, several, philosophers and artists have made like sort of a list of, which is the best art, which is the lowest, and usually the more intellectual, like poetry, music, rank above, the more physical, architecture and sculpture rank below. But there's always been the greatest challenge has been especially between painting and sculpture, also because very often painter and sculptors are trained basically in the same way, or they were trained in the same way, but I think still today. And because it's all based, of course, on the creation of figures, whether it's a flat surface or three-dimensional, but still you create figures. And so basically, some artists were great at both, but prefer one over another. Like Michelangelo considered himself more a sculptor than a painter, and Raphael was a pure painter. And Bernini was actually considered more of a sculpture, but he was actually very well versed in both fields. He became a sculptor because, of course, his father had a workshop, and he started at a very young age to work in that art form. Although one of his early biographers described his training also as part in the workshop of the Carracci and in the workshop of a few other painters in Rome at that time. So just to give the idea that he had a broader education than just the father workshop. Anyway, at the beginning of the 1600s, so Bernini here was 13, 14, he was already working, as far as we know, in the workshop of the father. And these artists, including Cigoli, asked Galilei what he thought about this superiority. And he says, And all this is in painting, no less than in sculpture. So he described the shade, the shadowing, the chiaroscuro, the different effects of object, the different effects of texture of surfaces. I mean the light, the shadow, the length, and the width. But in sculpture, the light and shadow are given by nature itself, and in painting, they're given by art. Therefore, the reason to an excellent painter becomes more admirable than an excellent sculptor. So Galilei stands with the painters because he thinks that painters create the shadow in the chiaroscuro, the darkening, and so they need to be more skilled than the sculpture that uses the natural light. Well, Bernini must be aware of this, and he managed to prove Galilei wrong. He managed to show how sculpture can do the same as painting, and I'm going to explain you why. This is a very young Gian Lorenzo with a mustache. Of course, it's the 17th century, is the century of the Musketeers. Now, we don't know exactly which one was the first artwork by Bernini. He probably worked on several small pieces in his father's workshop, starting from a very young age. I believe already at the age of 8 or 9 or even younger, he could have started working with the father. And this is the Cabra Maltea, is the goat with two putti playing with it. The putti could be actually, one of them could actually be Zeus, which was fed by the goat and then broke a horn of the goat, and the milk that was kind of accidentally spread went to create the Milky Way, and the horn was returned as the cornucopia, because of course the god was sad that had broken the horn to the goat. It's a beautiful story, and of course it's appropriate for the mythology that was one of the main theme chosen by the workshop Pietro Bernini. It's the oldest this could be 1609. Bernini would have been 10 or 11, so it's very, very young. It's most art historians do not believe that this is Bernini work unless it's much was made later, around 1514, 15. We don't really know, and I'm not going to go too deep into this because it's not the purpose of this talk, but you could see that there are a number of elements that really aim at that idea that sculpture can be as versatile and as successful as painting. Bernini, in this year, spent a lot of time in the Stanze Raffaello, in the rooms of Raphael, drawing, copying, painting. He had few years in which he really, really wanted to absorb as much as visual culture could have. And of course, Rome was probably one of the best cities in the world to do that at that time. How do we know all this? Well, at the beginning of the 1700s, this is dated 1713, his son Domenico, one of the Bernini, also Gian Lorenzo had 11 children or so. He married, he didn't marry very young, he married in his 40s or late 30s, early 40s, and he married a much younger bride that bore him a dozen children or so, and very Catholic. That's what you expected, to have, as many as you can. It's also true that sadly, half or more than half of them passed away. The reason why Gian Lorenzo was called Giovanni Lorenzo is because they are the names of Pietro's father, because he thought, maybe the child, because he had several girls before having a boy, he thought that maybe he would not have any more boys, so he wanted to give the names of both parents, as the father and the father-in-law, to the son, to make them happy, because that's the tradition in Italy, and it was back then and still today. And as you can see here, it says Bernino, non Bernini, and also it says Joe. Bernini used the name Lorenzo most of his life, and sometimes the G or the Joe. That's why we call him Gian Lorenzo. He presented himself as Lorenzo. His family, his friends, his lovers would have called him Lorenzo. Or people who didn't know him very well would call him the Cavalier Bernini, like Berlusconi. And I'll describe later on what type of Cavalier. Berlusconi, Berlusconi was the Cavaliere del Lavoro. It's, of course, Italy is a republic now, but there's still a sort of knighthood which is given for, you know, services country and of course through service to the industry. Now, one of the early certain works by Bernini is this one, which is the bust of Antonio Coppola, which is in the Church of San Giovanni di Fiorentini. This picture was taken during the exhibition 4 or 5 years ago. There was an exhibition about Gian Lorenzo Bernini in the Borghese Gallery, of course, because it's the gallery that has the largest amount of work by Bernini, and then several other busts and pieces, especially small pieces, were on display there. That's why. But this it was unknown up until 1967. It was discovered in the basement of the Church of San Giovanni de Fiorentini. Now it's in the Museum of San Giovanni de Fiorentini, which I believe is closed. And this was in the originally made for the hospital next door to San Giovanni de Fiorentini, which was demolished in the 19th century. And that's why this artworks and others were put into storage with no recollection of who this was or what is made for. It was discovered together with this other bust here of Antonio Cepparello, which is nearly a decade later. So this was made about 10 years later, the other one, by Levin, which is these Irving Levin, which is an American art historian who died not long ago, 4 years ago, 5 years ago, who basically had tracked down the payments and had tracked down the author down to Bernini or Bernini workshop. The bust by Antonio Coppola, which was a doctor, and he was basically his bust was in the chapel of the hospital, and it tracked the payment to Bernini's workshop in the name of Gian Lorenzo. And Gian Lorenzo must have been 14 when this was made, a very young teenager. And it's already an artwork that is a lot more innovative than the work of art made by his father. You could tell that Bernini had understood, had something in him that wanted to make something great, something that was going beyond what his father was doing. And it's not really clear. It's very hard to understand which parts of the artworks were made by Pietro Bernini or some of the workshop artists or by Gian Lorenzo himself. Anyway, this is in the name of Gian Lorenzo. You could see the how vivid is the facial expression, how resembling the reality of the man, which, you know, of course, was very skinny gentleman, and all wrapped up in this mantle, and then the hand coming holding the mantle, as Gian Lorenzo could have seen several Roman statues wearing the togas with the hand that way holding the toga. And there's several sculptures that Gian Lorenzo would have seen in the Vatican, in the Borghese collection. The Villa Borghese was built in 1605. And so at a very young age, he had access to all this vast collection of artworks. And that's where he drove a lot of ideas, as Michelangelo has done before him and several other artists before him, Raphael and others. Roman statues, Roman sculpture, they are the main source of inspiration for the artist. This is another gentleman, Antonio Cepparello, is in the same museum, same location, was found in the basement together. It's, of course, a very lifelike expression of the man. Bernini wanted to make statues that were really giving you the impression that the person was real, was there. This is made about 10 years later, so you could see the precision of the details. You could recognize the age of the man, and you could see the wrinkles and everything. It's the under eye. It's very, very, very precise. Also very lifelike. And again, in the same years, another very early work, which is buried in a wall of the Basilica of Santa Prassede in Roma, not far from Santa Maria Maggiore. That's where the Berninis were living at that time. Santa Maria Maggiore, and that's where its first jobs were as well. And because of course he had the workshop there. This is a bust of a clergyman, Giovanni Battista Santoni. This was made by the nephew a little later than and you could see, you recognize the face again, and the details of the man. You could see the wrinkle, and you could see the lifelike expression of the eyes. This is really an image that should have given you the impression as the person was right there, right, looking at you alive. And this idea of freshness, of lifelike figures, of course, uh, there is the element of Caravaggio with the naturalism, and the Caravaggio only died a few years before, and his works were still available in Rome all around. You could have seen them in churches. This idea of the representing the reality of the figures. At the same time, you have to give this an element of surprise, an element of marvel, which is one of the key terms of Baroque art. But Bernini also worked in the workshop of the father to do like late manneristic artworks, which don't really have yet that kind of power, that kind of innovations, but of course were a good training for him. Amongst them, and of course in later years there's been a more attention to the statues, there is this figure of the autumn, and this was paired with another one with spring, or a figure of a faun that has all this large group of fruits, pomegranate, grapes, and is kind of leaning against a trunk. And this figure, it's very similar to late, to a number of figures that were produced at the end of the 16th century,
Bernini's
similar to
sculptures are
Giambologna and those
huge in
artists.
life.
Now,
His figure
this statue went on an auction, I think in 2020 or not long ago, and it belonged to this little documentary. I'll go right to the statue, and it belonged to Hester Diamond. She was an art collector who passed away in 2020, 2021, and she was an avid collector of contemporary art and also old masters. And she owned also Botticelli, which was sold for 89 million, which is the second largest. It's one of the most expensive paintings ever sold an auction. And here, I think it was the second ever most expensive ever sold an auction. And then this one fetched 8.9 million, which is about the value of Bernini. Although this is largely made by Pietro Bernini or his workshop, maybe the fruits, the top part, which is more elaborated, it's the work of Gian Lorenzo Bernini. Anyway, it's a wonderful piece of art, and of course, that's what $9 million can get in your sitting room. Esther Diamond, she had it in her, I think it was in the sitting room with 20th century, 21st century art. That's the lady at the collection. Large part of her artworks, like including this contemporary artworks, were in her collection. But she had, you see, that's, was a bit a mixed match of different stuff. I found it quite interesting. This is the video made by Sotheby's, who sold the piece. And I bet that commission was quite high. And the other piece, so both of the, because of disclosures and let me just say, because of disclosure, that this is one. Because of disclosures and safety and privacy, we don't know who bought them and what they are, but they would be probably in America. It was bought she bought it in, I'm not sure if in 1980s or 1970s in London by an art dealer. Was probably smuggled it out of some British nobility estate. Somebody. It's very strange that it popped out in the in the art market and by an art dealer like that. And this is again another element. This is the spring, and that's the fall, and these flowers basically are the work by Bernini. There's also a Putto with the dragon, and there are several statues of Putti that were made in this year. Now we know from one of the biographies that the biography of the son that the first work of art that he made was a Putto, and you know there were comments, very very young age. The Gian Lorenzo Bernini drew attention because of its talent, its natural talents, and at some point. Pietro Bernini managed to start working with the Pope, Paul V, and with the Borghese family. And the Borghese, the Pope at some point saw the son had so much talent. He said, your son will be overtaking you soon, will be better than his master. And Pietro Bernini replied to the Pope, His Holiness, in this game, you got to lose to win. And then his idea was that if his son had become the most important artist in Rome at his time, that would have been the victory of his life for the father who brought him to Rome. So it's very interesting how you see such a great master, such an influential artist for over a century. So basically, for the most of the 17th century, Bernini was the artist in Rome. Anyway, this Putto is in the Getty Museum in California. There is another statue made in this same years by a teenager. Gian Lorenzo here was 17, 18. It's the faun molested by two cupids, which is in the Met in New York. And it's a very interesting piece. The faun is in a very awkward position. He has his legs spread up and he's holding the hand back. The composition is very, very, strange, but it gives you already the idea that he was experimenting, studying mostly Hellenistic art, which is the 3rd century BC Greek art, which Rome had a large collection of that, and especially still in the 17th century, there were a lot of these statues popping out. Gian Lorenzo Bernini also restored several ancient Roman statues, because, of course, a worker was a sculptor, was making new statues, but also if fragments, broken statues were found, they were taken to a sculpture workshop and they will fix them by putting in, the bits that were missing. You can see the putti here. You can see again, like in the other sculpture, we saw how heavily is the fruit and all this kind of element, the leaves, the hair, all these deep pictorial details. Again, we have this idea that sculpture here is rather painting, but the pictorial element, the decorative element, are also characteristic of the manneristic art, in which the talent of the artist was not so much in inventing a new way of doing art, but it was more into using these details. And of course, this abundance of nature was also something that had important precedents, like the loggia of Raphael, but also the loggia of the Carracci. And in the biography of Bernini, the Carracci are considered some of the masters of Bernini, if not as proper teachers, but as the ones who inspired him with a wonderful gallery in the Palazzo Farnese. Here you have another Putto which is falling down. And in this, with the bust that we saw before, next to the mythological theme statues, which will be a constant of this period, at least for another decade, we have the portraits. We've seen already some of the first artworks that Gian Lorenzo made were the portraits, starting with the portrait of Antonio Coppola. That was very successful, and the other ones were very successful. So Gian Lorenzo started a new business, opened a new line of business for his father's workshop, which were busts and portraits, which were very lucrative, and they get you very good clients, which of course were people with money, with power, which wanted their monuments and the portraits being made. And that's how Gian Lorenzo got to the Pope, and that's why he got to the most important Roman families. One of these statues is in the Santa Maria della Minerva, which is the bust of Giovanni Vigemo, another high clergy at the time. Again, you see the hand coming out of the mantle, like we saw in the other portrait. And the man here really looked like he's just woken up and looking at you. It's so incredible that how vivid, how lifelike these figures are. And before turning 20, Gian Lorenzo was introduced, or probably even earlier when he was 16 or 17, to Pope Paul V. And the Pope wanted to test him, and he asked him to draw him something. And then he asked, could you make a portrait of me? And Gian Lorenzo replied, yes, His Holiness, how do you want this portrait to be? And, the Pope understood straight away that Gian Lorenzo had something, and because he understood that the portrait is not just an image of the Pope, it's not just an image of the ruler of the person portrait, it's also a message, a statement. He has a meaning and he delivers something that's a lot more than just the image. And then you could see, in fact, the Pope is represented in a way that is like looking, studying. It looks kind of thoughtful, and he has a beautiful, beautiful outfits with his large gem, Saint Peter and Saint Paul embroider on his overcoat or whatever this mantle is, on his mantle basically. And then you could see also the fine plissé, the work of the shirt. And so all these delicate and very ornated elements really added value to the portrait. There are several copies of this bust, several versions. Lorenzo Bernini preferred marble to the bronze. He made large statues in bronze, but small portraits he preferred marble because on marble he had complete control. He finished the statue, he made it, that was it. Bronze was cast by someone else and was polished and finished off by someone else, so he kind of didn't have the same control on the on the bronze. I will use several black and white pictures because in black and white you could see some more details that in the color picture they kind of lost. Of this bust as well, there are several versions. This is the one in the Getty Museum. There's another one in the Borghese. It's not perfectly clear which one was made first. This probably was made later, but um, the one which is considered the first one is the small one. It's teeny tiny. It's about 1 foot tall. Is this one here, the so-called bustino, little bust. And of course, this on the bustino, the small bust, is in the Galleria Borghese with several other statues of Bernini. Is the largest collection of Bernini statues is basically in it's in the Borghese as a small statue, of course, part of a monument and thing. It's probably the Basilica of St. Peter that's the largest number because there's several tombs and monuments and canopy and several ones. I haven't counted them, but there'd be like a dozen or 15. And from 1505 to 1621, it was the Pope Borghese, and the family Borghese was really imposing itself. Camillo Borghese had a nephew, Scipione Caffarelli Borghese, which was an art lover and was the one that since 1505 had built the Casino Borghese, which was built by Flaminio Ponzi and a few other artists in the outskirts of, where is it? In the outskirts of Rome at that time. Today it's in central Rome, but back in the 17th century, it was what they call Villa Suburbana, suburban villa, because it was in suburbia, it was outside of the city walls. And so it was like a countryside pleasure. And the palace, the Gallery Borghese, was actually a casino. And the word casino, which in English means a gambling place, it derives from little casa, piccola casa, casino. And it was a place where they had gambling, but also they had music, concert, love affairs. Usually they had a palace, gardens, like in this case, this is the gardens, this is the walls. And then right here, immersed in the countryside, the Casino Borghese, which is here. which is quite a big building actually. And he hosted this at a sculpture gallery. Paintings were not here originally; they were in the Palazzo Borghese. They were moved here later on, and now there's also a painting gallery. The painting gallery is currently shut. They restored, they're refurbishing the top floor, so most paintings are currently in the Palazzo Barberini, which is again another state museum. The Borghese is still around. They still own the Palazzo Borghese downtown, but they had a financial crack at the end of the 19th century, and in 1901 they sold the Borghese Gardens and the museum with all its contents to the Italian government. They could have sold probably a much higher value abroad, internationally, but they would have had legal issues and problems. And also they decided to give this, to have this important heritage preserved and bought by the Italian government. It's very, very important thing that they did. And the today, where is it? This is the mat, the phone. Today the Galleria, it look like his, but originally he had all statues on a facade, all statues decorating it all over. And as you enter the main hall, there are a lot of Roman statues. There is a painted hall, painted ceiling by Mariano Rossi, and there's a statue here of Marcus Curtius, who rides into the Lacus Curtius, a Roman mythological element of this sinkhole in the Roman Forum, and this hero jump in the hole, and the hole's closed behind him. And the horse is an ancient Roman statue. The man on the top, who looks like flying, Marcus Curtius, it was made by Pietro Bernini in his workshop, and is the beginning of the relationship, or one of the works that Pietro made for the Borghese family. And sorry, I was looking for the map. Let's go back to the hall. Okay, I can't find the map. It's here. Let's go on the floor plan, because yes. So this is the main hall. Okay, I have to go back, sorry. This is the main hall that has several statues, and on the top floor, here there are also many Gian Lorenzo Bernini works kept on the top floor. Anyway, let's go back to the presentation. So this is the Pope that was one of the first patrons of Bernini. This is a self-portrait of Gian Lorenzo Bernini. Gian Lorenzo made several self-portraits, portraits of young men, several paintings. I described Bernini as a painter a little bit in the future. These are the two portraits of Paul V. That's a bronze version here on the right. And that's his beautiful picture. You can see how beautiful is this statue. Now, for the Borghese, Gian Lorenzo created this, which was his first kind of large mythological group for the Borghese, which is Aeneas escaping from Troy with his father Anchise on his shoulder. And it's still in the Borghese gallery today, which is incredible. And I'm going to go into the room, which should be here, where there is this dialogue with other Roman. These are all ancient Roman statues here around, except this one is another Bernini's, but much later. And here you can see this group of Aeneas and Anchise. Now, the mythology is based on the Virgil's Aeneid, where when the destruction of the city of Troy, Aeneas had a vision of his dead wife saying, "Leave and go to Italy. You're gonna become the founder of an important dynasty that one day will rule the world, so the Romans. And so he took his father, his past, and the father is holding these little statues, which are the let me just get back to the room, which are the penati, the lares, and behind him there is the sun that has a lamp. Now I have a few figure. That's the portrait of the old man, and you can see he managed to represent the skin, the wrinkles, the kind of a loosening skin of the older man. He's holding these little statues which are their ancestors. So Anchisa symbolizes the past that Aeneas is taking with him. Look at the knee here. You can see the wrinkles on the knee. He represented the knee of a senior, or an older man, as opposed to the strong, hands and these veins on the younger man. And then behind us the son Iulo Ascanio with the lamp, symbol of the future. Bernini really managed to kind of create this um, uh, vision, basically, of the it's not here, of the, yes, that is the portrait of the Pope, of how include mythology and then creating a beautiful detail art, piece of art that was representing realistic detail. I was looking for a more zoom, a more realistic detail, and also uh, by stacking them up, like putting the father, the son, and then the grandson, it also kind of represent the lineage of Aeneas, which is ultimately the lineage of the Romans, of ancient Rome, which was revived in the glory of the Borghese collection. On the left, you see the bust of the Cardinal Borghese, which later on Gian Lorenzo Bernini would have made. There are two of them inside the gallery. I'll describe them later on. And the working for the Borghese also got them, for the Pope and the family of the Pope, also got the attention of all the other cardinals, because of course they wanted then, and the other family, they wanted them to have some work being made for them. Amongst them, there's the bust of Camilla Barbadori. She was the mother of Maffeo Barberini, cardinal at that time, which eventually in 1623 will become the Pope, Urban VIII, a pope with which Bernini had a very close relationship, and it really brought him to fame more than the Borghese, possibly. He's the Pope who asked him to work in the Vatican, as we will see in the next episodes. Here, the portrait was made for a tomb in the Chapel Barberini, and is now in a museum in Copenhagen. And you can see that the portrait of the mother of the cardinal, it's represented extremely lifelike, with also the signs of the aging as the mature woman, and has also, of course, the veil. We're not used to that now, but in the up until the 19th century, women all wear veils, and the veil was mandatory, especially in churches during ceremonies. Not so much in open air, but you generally see in paintings, in representation. In Middle Ages, every woman wore a veil. As in the 16th, 17th, 18th century, became less, especially the nobility didn't wear that so much privately, but they wore it in church. And still today, if you go to certain towns in southern Italy, Sundays in Sicily and Mass, the ladies all wear the lacy headscarf. Now, Pietro and Gian Lorenzo Bernini worked for the Barberini in the church of Sant'Andrea della Valle, which is the church where the Tosca, the opera first act is set, is right by Piazza Navona. In the chapel, you can see there's the coat of arms of Barberini, and these two putti sitting on the top of the frame, on the top of the chapel, they're actually by Gian Lorenzo Bernini. There's two little putti. And again, Bernini was in his 20s here. He lived with his father up until 1629, so in his 30s, and he only married, I think, late 30s, early 40s. So this moment is very intense. He works a lot with the father, and there are several other busts and statues. So the bust of Antonio Barberini was also made, which was the father of I think Francesco was the uncle. Antonio was the father of the Cardinal Barberini, was also to go in the tomb. Bernini draw it, so actually the before making a sculpture, he would have made a drawing, a bozzetto sketch. This was actually made by Giuliano Finelli. It's not Bernini's son, but the concept is basically Bernini's. And this is the Pope Urban VIII, the Cardinal Barberini. Then here is represented as a Pope Maffeo Barberini. And possibly for the Barberini, this San Sebastian was made, and which has that kind of quality, the that kind of element of if you see how the flesh looks really real and how it's polished and finished to perfection, which you could see in Michelangelo, in the Pietà, especially in other artworks by Michelangelo. And that's like a line that goes from Michelangelo to Bernini to Canova. You could see that this greatest artists, they had this obsession for the perfection of the design. This was possibly made for the Chapel Barberini. It's now in the Thyssen-Bornemisza Museum, and it's again in the same years, 16, 17. You could see the figure of Christ. Christ looks asleep here. It doesn't look dead. It's not rigid. It's abandoned as, one. It looks like a similar to one of the phones or those siders that fell asleep after being drunk. So there's this idea of sleep, and you can see the hair, the beard, you can see the single hair. So this obsession for the little details, and also you can see the arrow, you can see the nipples protruding very well. There's always this attention to these elements as well, and it's quite sensual as well. It's because look, someone is asleep with a mouth half open. There's this idea. It's very materialistic, actually, rather than spiritual. This is one of the criticisms that Bernini had as well. And in the same time, the same years, possibly because that's St. Sebastian, St. Lawrence, they are some of the early Christian martyrs. The biography of Bernini written by the son says that one of his first statue was this San Lorenzo, one of the first full-size statues was this San Lorenzo, which was made because of his name, Lorenzo. I'm not sure of that. Maybe this was again for another of these chapels, maybe for the Barberini chapel. But here, Bernini, again, thinking about that challenge with the painting, made something that traditionally was considered taboo. Like there are those things where you are trained into a profession, into an art, into anything. The first thing they tell you is they tell you what you do and what you don't do, the things that you can do and the things you don't do because it's impossible. And then this is true up until somebody comes which doesn't know that that's impossible and does it. And this is the case of Bernini. I'm pretty sure he was aware that people never never sculptured flames. There was something that in the 1500s, they didn't think that you can render fire in a form of a sculpture because marble was a cold media. It's white, it's shiny, it has it doesn't have that kind of flexibility that painting gives you to create the fire, to represent the fire. But he did the fire. There's beautiful flames, and which look real. If you look at them, if you stare at them for a little bit, you can almost hear the fire going off. And another element that they made is like statues here, they are meant, again, this one and this one, to be looked at from one side, one corner, like Michelangelo did. They are presented, although they are full round statues, but these are statues that are meant to be looked at from one perspective and from one point only. And contrary to what the late Renaissance artists had made, like Giambologna, Mannati, artists, especially Mannati, were criticized by Michelangelo because Michelangelo had this idea that you have to look at the statue the way the artist wanted you to look at. So Bernini also retrieved this element here, and this San Lorenzo is beautiful. This is a it's a part of the Uffizi collection. I don't think it's in the Uffizi now. I think it's on display somewhere else, but it's in Florence, and it's again, although it has a vein and the marble has some imperfection, it's really an incredible marble. You can also see this has not been restored, so all the aging, the darkening, the aging of the marble that can be removed if you restore it. It's mostly this is largely this darkened patch is largely the fat from the fingers that people have been touching it for years. Now, and the statue that we've seen so far with these nude figures, the sense and the San Sebastian and the San Lawrence, and also kind of remind of the restoration works. Like one restoration work that Bernini might have done, might have not done, but have done other similars, is the Barberini phone, which this emerged from the ditch of the next to the Castel Sant'Angelo at the beginning of 1620s, and it was missing the legs and missing part of the body, and it was restored in a beautiful way, and later on was bought by the Germans, so it's in Germany now. It's really an incredible sculpture here. We could see this image of relaxation of the body. Similar, it's the Ares Ludovisi, the god Mars, which is in the Ludovisi collection. This is in the Museum of, I think this is in Rome in the Thermo Diocletian now, and has, or in the Palazzo Altemps, I'm not sure where it is now. And again, it was a fragmented statue, and Bernini's workshop worked to restore it. Another patron of Gian Lorenzo Bernini, it's Monsignor Montoya. Montoya was a Spaniard and commissioned a few statues to Bernini, and including his bust. And here again, you can see, like the other bust we saw, how lifelike it is, how realistic it is. You could see the frowning on his forehead. You could see the how he casts the sights on the side, and it's very very lifelike. It's really incredible. It looks like somebody was just coming up and popping up to say hello. And this became then a very popular way to make sculptures and busts, not just like the resemblance, but somebody's nature, somebody's soul, somebody's kind of inflection. For Montoya, Bernini had made these two busts, which are in Palazzo di Spagna. Now, everybody knows Piazza di Spagna, but Piazza di Spagna is called Piazza di Spagna because starting from 1622, the embassy of the Kingdom of Spain, was in. I just need to find the Piazza di Spagna. It's here. Was in this palace. Now there's been an embassy since the 1400s. It was the embassy of Spain is the second oldest embassy in the world after the one of Venice. And of course, it's the oldest, considered the Republic of Venice was gone in the 1790s. And the Palazzo, let's go a little back. Yes, this is the Valentino shop. And this is the Palazzo di Spagna, which is still today the embassy of Spain for the Santa Sede, for the Holy See, for the Vatican. Separate from the embassy of Spain for Italy is in the Palazzo Borghese. It's all the backside of Palazzo Borghese. And so they rented this one in the 1600s, and then in the late 17th century they bought it. So it's actually owned by Spain. And it has a wonderful art collection inside, including these two busts, the sinner and the saved soul, or the satyr and the nymph. We're not sure, but traditionally they call anima dannata, anima beata, the beatified soul and the damned soul, which is this one here. And Bernini here really worked with the mask, with the facial expression, which is something not unique to Bernini, but he really mastered this way. And you can see also how the hair represented again in a very pictorial way, and there's movement and there's this expression. See the mustache here, you can see the skin, how is it tied. It really had, Bernini had understood that statues, they don't need to be static. They had to tell a story. They had to be have a lot of drama and energy, right like on a stage. And the 17th century is the century of theater, is the century of Calderon de la Barca. No, life is a dream, and is the great century of the Baroque theater. Is the century of Shakespeare. So it's the century of in which they started to look at life and whatever happens to us as a sort of a show, as something that, has an appearance, and there's also deeper levels to it. And these two figures are very, very beautiful. The Beata here, the sort of nymph with the beautiful flowers, and this expression of like grace or looking up, and the other one. Now, and they're very, very unique. I think that I had more pictures, but I don't know, be here. Again, the workshop, the works for the portraits and the bust became even more popular in the starting in the 1620s, especially after he made the bust of a pope. Of course, everybody then wanted the bust of Bernini, by Bernini, and including the Cardinal Roberto Bellarmino, Saint Roberto Bellarmino now. He is the one who was the prosecutor of Galileo Galilei in the first trial, not the second one. Bernini was trialed once. The first one at the beginning of 1600, and then the second one in 1630s to 31. By then, Bellarmino had died. And Bellarmino was the one who agreed to kind of forgive and not be too harsh on Galilei. He understood Galilei. He understood what Galilei teaching and discoveries of a bigger universe meant for the church, more than what Galilei understood. Galilei was a very clever scientist and a genius scientifically. I don't think he understood the consequences of describing the word in a different way that the church had taught for centuries. For the church, at least. The church understood it very well. They knew exactly what it meant. That's why they stopped him. Galilei wasn't so sure. Galilei was really deeply Catholic, a true believer. And he really taught that maths was the language that God had used to create the word. So he was very authentic in that. But Bellarmino made him writing a paper saying, you cannot teach Copernico, you cannot teach heliocentrism. You need to teach that the Earth is in the center of the universe with the planets revolving around, not the other way around. But what you could do, you could tell a fantasy. You could teach your students that is not real, but we can imagine a world and a universe with the sun in the center and all the planets revolving, and you can make your calculation. You could do it that way, as it is a fantasy, not something real, which Galilei did, but of course, after another decade, it was prosecuted again. It was in his 70s when there was a second trial, and after he died, the Medici wanted to bury him, and in a church with a funeral and everything. And the Pope sent a letter to the Medici, said, "Not you dare. I will excommunicate you if you bury an excommunicated in a holy ground." So Galilei was buried in a field for like 2 centuries or so before it was then translated in the Church of Santa Croce. Anyway, so this is the Cardinal Bellarmino, was a Jesuit. His body is actually in a glass case, and his monument here is in the Church of Gesù in Rome. This is San Roberto Bellarmino. He was a very clever man, though, but of course he was a persecutor. Bellarmino had also accused another famous philosopher and scientist, but not a scientist, a philosopher, and an author of theater as well, which was Giordano Bruno. It was Bellarmino who sent Giordano Bruno to be burned at the stake, and was Giordano Bruno who had said to Bellarmino, "You are more scared of pronouncing this sentence than I am to hear that." Bruno was far beyond that. Bruno believed that the universe was infinite, that there were billions of stars and galaxies and planets just like ours, and all the stars looked just like our planets. This was in 1580s, he told that, which is much earlier than any telescope or anything. So it's really, really incredible. The Bellarmino was a man of faith. Of course, it's represented in a moment of praying. This is not as lifelike as the others, at least in the expression. And maybe this was made from a copy. There are several others busts that he made this time. This is the French Cardinal de Soudy, which is in Bordeaux. With this is very similar in the cape and all the ordination of the one of the Pope. This cardinal or somebody who ordered this bust had seen the bust of the Pope and wanted to be made just like that. It's like when you see something nice, oh, I want that outfit, or I want that portrait, or I want that picture. And again, sex, sensuality, nudes. This is the hermaphrodite. This is a Roman statue. It's actually an Hellenistic statue. And the mattress was made very skillfully by Gian Lorenzo Bernini. It's a wonderful mattress. The statue was almost original, almost all preserved. Chip nose, maybe talon, a few other parts, but the body was largely. And from the backside, it looks like a woman, but it's an hermaphrodite, so it's a woman and a man. And of course, it's a mythological figure, very well present in the mythology. There's also a religious meaning to that. For Plato, it represented the Aboriginal humans, which were, full whole, so they are man and woman in one figure, but they were too strong and too powerful, and they were a threat to the gods, so the gods decided to split us. And this is like one of the Plato mythology. It's a very beautiful statue. It was one of the statues that was then sold to the French to Napoleon by Camillo Borghese. In the beginning of the 19th century, he married Paolina, which was the sister of Napoleon. And then Camillo Borghese was convinced then that Paris was the new capital of the world, which it was basically, and that the Rome kind of history and Rome glory was over, long over, and probably had been finished since Bernini had died in a century and a half earlier. But anyway, he sold over 200 marbles, so most of the original marble collection of ancient marbles, to the French. In fact, in the Louvre, there's an entire section of the Louvre called Borghese marbles, the hundreds of these marbles. But Camillo was a very wealthy man, so was able to repurchase, buy more of them. So now, if you go to the Borghese, there is this other one which was made later by Bergonzi with a different mattress and with a different hermaphrodite, which is an original Roman one. And the hermaphrodite, this is the look on the other side. So it's a boy on this side, but it's got breasts too. So it's a very, and has this beautiful mattress. Mattress by Bernini is much, much better than the one that is now in the Borghese. It's very, very beautiful. And that is the art of Bernini. Pope Borghese died in 1521 after 16 years of reign. A new pope was created, which was Ludovici, Ludovico, I think. I'm not sure it's his name. And Bernini made a portrait of him, of course, straight away. Again, very similar to the portrait that he made for Pope V. He managed to capture also the essence of the expression of a very cultivated pope who, came from one of the most important family of Rome at that time. But Pope Ludovici didn't last very long. He only lasted a couple of years. These are two bust versions. Now, don't remember exactly what these are. Sorry. This is in Toronto, in Ontario, in the Museum of Ontario. And these two, one is in Bologna, the other one, I don't remember what it is, but they are in Italy. And this is the marble one, and these two are the bronze ones, which were, of course, cast after the marble ones. Very often, for the bronze cast, they use clay first, but of course, they could be done from a marble statue too. And another very wealthy family at that time, which had a vast villa right where the Termini station is today, was the Montalto Peretti. he was the Cardinal Montalto was a nephew of the Pope as well, and he had a wonderful gardens with a beautiful fountain, and he wanted a Triton and a Neptune to be at the top of the fountain. Now, this villa was completely destroyed in the 19th century. Most of the artworks were sold. This one ended up in England and in the Victorian Albert Museum. It's really difficult today to understand how this looked like. You have to imagine this at the top of a vast body of water. And so he had a complete different image, as this was part of the movement of the water. So similar to the Fountain of the Four Rivers or other celebrated fountains by Bernini. So this is one of the first fountains, probably the first fountain Bernini works as a solo artist, not with the father. And you could see the beard and the imposing figure, but it's also so dynamic and so light. And you could see here the trident blowing into the horn, into these shells. It's very, very beautiful. Sadly, the villa was dismantled, but it would have been really incredible. And this is the Cardinal Peretti Montalto. The Villa Peretti was the beautiful villa in the area of the Termini station, which nothing is left today. And of course he had also a bust made of himself. Again, you could see the frowning expression is very intense to represent the man. And at this point, most clergy in Rome, they wanted the bust by Bernini. This is Carlo Antonio del Pozzo. This bust is today is Edinburgh. And for the Ludovisi family, this statue was made, which is now in the Borghese. It's Ada's. Yes, Bernini was, Bogna says, was 24, 25 when he made all these statues. So 22, 23 when he made the Aeneas, and this was 24. But he had been working for over 10 years, maybe he had 15 years of training. Now, if you study the life of the great artists, the greats, you see that they all started at a very young age, 8, 7, 8, 9, very little, they already showed their talents. And they did only that, and that only for every day of their life till they died. That's how they became so good. And that's why it's really hard today to see that level of quality, that level of greatness, because most artists, they start much later. They generally start as teenagers still today, but there's a lot that start later. And so that's too late then. You need to start very, very young. The ones who get very, very good are generally musicians because they start 6, 7. That's why in their 20s, they're already so great because they've been doing that for 10, 15 years. That's what you need to be good at something, 10, 15 years. If you have the talent. If you don't have talent, maybe the lifetime is not enough. But if you have talent, you can, really get a top of your craft in a decade or so. This was it's very peculiar, the fact that this was a gift that was purchased by the Borghese by the Cardinal Scipione Borghese for the nephew of the Pope, which was the Cardinal Ludovisi. What was going on then? Why the Cardinal, and it's here, the Zarathus Proception, why the Cardinal Borghese wanted to give a statue to the Cardinal Ludovisi? Because Cardinal Borghese was the nephew of the Pope who had died, so he lost most of his power. They kept the money, but lots of the power was gone. And so this was a message for his colleagues saying, you are now the nephew of the most powerful man in Rome. You're the nephew of the Cardinal. Cardinal Nepote was the normal Pope. As soon as he got elected, he made 2 or 3 of his nephews cardinals, make sure that there was a chance to get another Pope. It's called nepotism, which is something is still true in Italy and Europe. It's in America with all those Bush and the Kennedys. It's something that you still have. I'm sure maybe Donald Trump had done a lot of nepotism, so we might see that again in other words. And
We have a Trudeau in Canada there.
yeah, of course, Trudeau is also the Cardinal Nipote. His father was a politician, wasn't he? And And sometimes they're good, sometimes they're not very good. It depends. The message was that as Proserpina, she was living, above ground, and then Hades saw her and fell in love with her and wanted her just go get and grab her and put her in the underground. So from one day or another, the Pope could be kidnapped by death, and then the wealth of and the joy and all the benefits would have gone with it. So it's just a message of an experience that I've passed through this. I've had very good 16 years and made the most of them, while my uncle, the Pope, got me everything I needed. Do the same, because this one's last. One day your uncle will die and you lose everything. It's very interesting that this piece of art, which was in the Palazzo Ludovisi, or in the Villa, I think this was in a niche in the gardens of the Palazzo Ludovisi and the garden of the Casino Ludovisi. Uh, this later on was purchased again by the I think this was purchased by the Italian state in the early 20th century and returned to the Borghese Palace. So the Borghese had paid for it and they given it to the Ludovisi, and eventually it was returned to where it came. And it's something very, very rare to happen, and it's very, very interesting that it has happened, and maybe it was its destiny. And here, one of the qualities that everybody, since Bernini was very young, really celebrated was the idea that he was able to give a lifelike consistency to the skin, that kind of softness of the skin. If you look at the details of the fingers that go deep into the flesh of um, Proserpina, I have more detailed pictures here. So you could see here, there's black and white, and there's this one here. You can see the pressure of the fingers in the body of Proserpina. You could see the beautiful body of Proserpina, and you could see the contrast of the strength of the muscles of the god Hades. You could see here the detail of the veins. It's really, really incredible. Then the Cerberus on the side, the three-headed dog. Proserpina tries to fight back, and then she's crying. She's got tears on her eyes, and the um, actually pulls some of the skin of the Hades. Then there's here you can see the muscle, the perfection of the muscle details of the anatomy. Also the back, this is made very beautifully. Here you can see she is pulling with her hand the face of Hades, which actually looks on the side, and you can see the beard flowing. It's really, really an incredible masterpiece, and this is really one after seeing this, one could think, oh, you cannot do anything better than that. Bernini managed to make even better statues, which is what we will see in the next episode about sculpture. And we also see the continuation of the work with the father under a new pope, because as was, told to the Cardinal Ludovisi, the pope didn't last long. Pope Ludovisi, Gregory 15, only lasted a couple of years. And so the Barberini, Maffeo Barberini, another patron of Bernini, became Pope, and he lasted 21 years. And so he was really the one who trusted Bernini to work in the Vatican and to become the most important artist and architect in Rome. Bravo Renzo. Yes, this is the fountain of La Barcaccia, but we'll see the Barcaccia next time. This was one of the last works that Bernini also made together with his father. I believe this was commissioned to Pietro Bernini, not to Gian Lorenzo, and then Gian Lorenzo also worked with it. And this is the end of the first volume. And next time we'll see the masterpieces of sculpture. So starting from the Borghese, and also looking at the monuments and the burials. We'll complete the sculpture, all the sculptures that Bernini made, and we'll talk about the Vatican as well a little bit, because then I wanted to divide into more themes now, because Bernini then makes a lot of works as an architect too. Ultimately, he changed completely the face of Rome in the 17th century. Now, I have And I want to just comment one last thing, because here Bogner says nobody works in marble now. So of course statues still gets made, and they don't work marble by hand. Has, at the time of Bernini, they use power tools, which I think power tools are much faster, and I think there's not that kind of there is not that difficulty, there's physical challenge, the need for planning that is required by the handwork. They had drill, hand drill, and other tools, but not as power tools that we use today. One of the and one of the problem with artists who work marble today, they either make copies of other statues. They're very, very well skilled artisans that can work marble uh, beautifully, and they make beautiful statues, mostly in Seravezza, near Lucca. There's a lot of workshops they work marble, but they they are not really innovative artists who work marble in a way to create figurative art. They mostly work marble as a matter for abstract or conceptual art. There was an exhibition this winter in Rome at the Colosseum about the marble, and that has a lot to do with uh, an artwork the type of art that it makes meaning for this word. And maybe at the end of the talk I'll mention more Brancusi. Constantine Brancusi, he was a pupil of Rodin. He could have become a Rodin too, and made beautiful romantic and figurative stuff. He did nothing of that. He made like a 30 meters stick, 30 meters tall stick, 60 feet tall stick, 90 feet tall stick, something like that, and very abstract figures, because that's what he wanted to do, and that's what he thought it was more relevant for contemporary world. So it's a very complex thing. Artists that do figurative art, like Iago, there's this artist in Naples that makes very figurative statue. I think it's pure kitsch. It's not good at all. It's just like, in fact, it's a type of art very, very that I get a lot of comment on Instagram and social media, but it's really, really not good at all. Anyway, bit of music, l'arpeggiata, Augelin, Baroque music, and then we fly around the Borghese. So we see, thank you, Joanna, thank you, everybody. We see a bit of the Borghese gallery, and we fly around the Borghese gallery, and we see Bernini statues. And I'll see you next Sunday.
Augelin che il tuo amor segue ognor, Augelin che il tuo amor segue ognor, dal faggio al finir, e formando i bei concenti, vai temprando col tuo canto i miei lamenti, vai temprando col tuo canto i miei lamenti. Il mio sol troppo fier, troppo altier, il mio sol troppo fier, troppo altier del mio gran cuor. Gloria amata, gloria bella, modia ingrata ai miei priegi, empiaer bella, modia ingrata ai miei prieghi, empiaer bella. Non sia più cruda, non morirò, non sia più cruda, non morirò, se la è qualcuno. Taci, taci, che già pia. Porge i baci al mio labbro.
Buonanotte.
Buonanotte Mario,
Buonanotte.
grazie.
Grazie. Thank
Grazie.
you.
Grazie tanto.
I'll see you next Sunday.
Sì.
A presto Mario.
Buonanotte.